Hello, my name is Jennifer Wilson, and I'm with the Gulfport School District. And today we're going to talk about standard RL.4.6, comparing and contrasting points of view. Let's get started. So what is point of view? In stories, the narrator, or the person telling the story, always has a point of view. So the point of view is how the narrator thinks or feels about the story's events. So the story can either be told in first person or third person point of view. First person is when the narrator experiences what happens in the story. So they are inside of the story. You're going to see things about how they feel. You're going to see things that happen necessarily to them. But then you're going to have third person, which is when the narrator observes what is happening in the story, but they're on the outside. So they're just observing. So they're not necessarily discussing how they feel, but they're just talking about the details of what is happening in the story. So let's look at some examples. Okay, so first person point of view. Let's see why this would be considered first person. During my math test, I noticed that my fancy mechanical pencil was out of lead. As I searched my desk for a new pencil, my teacher asked me what I was doing. My cheeks burned as I sheepishly asked her for a new pencil. After all, she had always told me that mechanical pencils were not a good choice. So let's look at some clues as to why this is first person. All right, so we have the narrator is telling the story. She is discussing her feelings as the story is happening. We see that her cheeks burned and how she felt when her teacher asked what she was doing. And the events are from her perspective. And then also we can see throughout the story that pronoun I. So that is another way we can figure out that it is first person point of view. So let's look at third person. Okay. Every time Kyle went to the diner, he ordered a bacon cheeseburger with no ketchup and extra cheese. Today, when he went, the restaurant was out of cheese and he was devastated. While everyone else happily ate their lunch, he grumbled to himself about his bad luck. So let's see how this is third person. Okay, so we know that the narrator is not the actual person in the story. They're just telling the story. They are observing what is happening to the character, which our character is Kyle. They're also telling us what is happening, but we really don't know how Kyle feels. Kyle is probably hanging his head down. That's how we know he's devastated. And we see that he's grumbling, but we really don't know what he's saying to himself. And then also we see that pronoun he. So we know that the narrator is not the actual person in the story. They're just telling the story about what is happening. Okay, so what we're going to be studying in fourth grade is comparing the two, first person and third person. All right, so when we're comparing points of view, we have our stories. Now, one thing about this is the stories are going to have the same topic. So let's look at our first story. Today is an exciting day in room 338. It's the day when all of the students will give their state reports in front of the whole class. For weeks, the students have been working on their reports. They have been researching all about the states they choose and writing reports about the information. Today, they will share their projects with their classmates, and the room is buzzing with excitement. Miss Smith, the teacher, has a hard time choosing who will go first. Each student wants to be the first one to go because they are thrilled to share all of his or her hard work. Eventually, Miss Smith chooses Derek to go first. The rest of the class anxiously awaits for their turns. Okay, so as you're reading that, think about what that point of view is. Is it first person or is it third person? Now let's look at our second story. Today is the worst day in 4th grade. It's state report day, and even though I have finished my report, I am not looking forward to sharing it with my classmates. I'm so nervous that I tried 3 times to convince my mom I needed to stay home from school today. She said since I didn't have a fever, I had to go to school. Here I am dreading talking about the state of Mississippi in front of my friends. My only hope is that everyone else talks before me and takes up too much time so I don't have to present it to Miss Smith. Speaking of Miss Smith, here she is. Everyone in class is nervous too. They are all looking down at their desk, hoping they don't get picked first. Miss Smith eventually chooses someone to go first. It's bad news. I'm going first. All right, so let's think about what point of view is passage number 2. All right, so now we're going to be comparing the two. Okay, first one, we're looking at passage number 1. Okay, so passage number 1 is written in 3rd person. So we see that the narrator might not even be a student in Miss Smith's class. They are on the outside. They're giving the details of what is going on, but you don't see how the character is feeling. You don't feel any of that emotion. So nothing is happening to them. They're just looking on the outside. But both of these stories both talk about the same event where they're presenting their reports in Miss Smith's class. So that is how they are alike and how they're different. So now let's look at passage 2. Okay, so we know with this one, looking at it, it is actually going to be first person. So we know that the passage has the narrator named Derek. He's the one telling the story, and he's also including more details, and he's describing his feelings and maybe describing what his classmates are feeling as well. And then the narrator says, I'm going first, so he is using that first person point of view. So we see that both of these are telling the same story, but they're both at different points of view. We see one that's on the outside looking in, giving us facts and details, and then one that's on the inside where the narrator is talking about what's going on and also how they feel about it. Let's look at another example. All right, so our first passage, let's look at it. I got in big trouble today, and I'm not even sure what I did wrong. My parents have grounded me for 2 weeks, which is the longest I've ever been grounded in my life. It is all because they think I spilled water on my Nintendo Switch today while I was playing. I love my Switch, and I am always careful when playing it. I don't even remember bringing a water bottle into the room, let alone putting it on the table where my console is. Somehow the water spilled onto my console while I was answering the door. My parents now think I'm not capable of taking care of my things. Now my Switch is not working anymore. That's the worst punishment. Okay, so let's think about what point of view is our first passage while we're reading our second one. Isaac loves his Nintendo Switch. He bought it with his own money and takes good care of it. His parents also have a rule that he cannot bring any food or drinks in the living room while he is playing with it. Yesterday, Isaac was playing his Switch while his dad was making a snack. His dad brought the snacks and 2 glasses of water into the room and set it on the table. The doorbell rang and Isaac went to answer the door. It was his friend Kyle. While he was at the door, the cat jumped on the table, knocking the glass of water over onto the Switch console. Dad noticed the mess and called him over to clean it up. No one remembered how the glass made it on the table. Isaac was now grounded because they thought he broke the rule. All right, so let's compare the 2 points of view. So let's look at our first passage. Okay, so let's talk about what is the point of view in this particular story. All right, so passage 1 is written in first person. Isaac is our narrator, and he is giving an account of what happened in the story and also how he felt. He's not sure what he did wrong. He's trying to figure out what happened. How did it end up there? But we see that this is written in first person because we know what is happening in the story, and we're getting more about Isaac's emotions. Okay, but both of these stories, how they are alike is they're both talking about the same event in how Isaac is grounded because they thought he ruined the switch. Okay, so let's look at our second passage and how it is alike and how it is different from passage 1. Okay, this one is written in third person. So we have our narrator who is telling the story of what happened, but they're not involved in it. Also, they include some other characters. They include talking about the dad. They include talking about his friend who came over to, and when he answered the door, but they were not in the original passage or the first passage. Also, it includes facts about how the switch was broken, but it doesn't talk about how Isaac feels when it's broken and how he feels when he's grounded. So we see from the outside, we see more details about the story, but we don't see necessarily that emotion that the narrator who is going through the events, how they would tell the story. But we see how they're alike is the stories are both the same events. Okay, so when we're thinking about comparing first person and third person points of view, we're thinking about the different ways. We have our narrator is part of the story in first person. So they're going to talk more about their feelings and their emotions when the event is happening. But third person, the narrator is not going to be necessarily a part of the story. They might be someone on the outside looking in, or they might be just a minor person who's watching it happen, but they're not necessarily the actual person. So they're going to tell more details about the story, but they're not going to include their thoughts and feelings. So when you see that, make sure you know what is the difference between first and third person. And when you're looking at those stories and how they are alike and different, look and see what is happening. Is the person in the story or on the outside of the story? So that is how you can compare points of view.